Well, it is finally whiskey cabinet time, and I could not be more excited to get stuck into this project, especially with some of the grain patterns in this 𝗟𝗓. I don't know if you can see that, and I will give you a closer look, but this stuff is just insane. I'm going to do like a layered pattern. So the 𝗟𝗓 will be the outside boards, and I'll mill down some of this other stuff to do like some strips, some pattern down the middle. Let's get stuck into it and let's have some fun, push ourselves a bit. Cool. So I've got some really special stuff for this build. I've got this amazing 𝗕𝗩𝗘𝗧 yoke, and I've got this piece of marry that's left over from another project. I'm not sure how much of it's usable, but we're going to go ahead and mill it. I have got another slab if this doesn't work, but I think it's got some really cool patterns and some really cool sap veins running through it. But this is what I'm really excited about. The patterns in this 𝗟𝗓 is absolutely insane. Still going to require a bit of milling and a heck of a lot of sanding, but check out some of this patterning. This is why I love Western Australian hardwoods so much. So this whiskey cabinet has been on the back burner for a really long time. And I knew when I found this 𝗟𝗓, it was finally time to stop conceptualizing it and bring this thing to life. The great thing about this build is it's for me, which means I can be way more relaxed when it comes to the finer details, and I can build things on the fly, which is what I really love to do. Which is a process that also comes to bite me on the bum every now and then. And this is one of those cases. I'm not really taking any measurements when it comes to milling and processing this lumber, and I'm basically just eyeballing it, which is gonna lead to some consequences that you'll see a bit later on. But that's okay. That's something I can live with, and problems come up, and solving those problems is also something that I enjoy. Now, the reason I like building in this style is because I can adapt things, and as I'm building the piece, I can stand back and I can visually see what I think it needs, and I can add or subtract those things as I'm building. The inspiration for this build so far is a fusion of styles. I'm kind of going for a classic / modern, but also futuristic style. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but it works perfectly in my head. Now, I feel like I should probably clear something up. When I said I'm not taking measurements, that's not entirely true. I know how big I want the cabinet to be. What I'm referencing is the thickness of the strips. I'm purely going aesthetically. And once we've got everything milled and cut to size, we can begin the process of gluing up our panels. There's one major thing to consider before doing any glue up of this nature, and that is grain orientation and pre-laying out your pattern to make sure you're happy. Once it's glued together, it's too late. This is something that I've overlooked in the past, and it's really affected the overall quality and aesthetic of my build. But you know what? It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay if things don't go as planned or you don't foresee things properly. Mistakes are really just lessons in disguise. And once you understand that, your whole build process will be way more enjoyable. And here we are talking about lessons and mistakes, and I'm about to make another mistake. Do you remember a minute ago when I said I wasn't taking any measurements, I was just milling these strips up by eye? Well, here's where it comes to bite me on the butt. Little did I know that these panels were going to be too wide to fit through my thicknesser. What I should have done was write my measurements down with each strip that I was milling so I knew the overall width. Now, it's only like 8mm too wide, which is probably the most annoying part, but it's not a big deal. At the end of the day, all it means is I have to rip a strip off one side on the table saw in order to get it through my thicknesser. Alright legends, quick little break from the build. Not for a sponsor, but for something my wife and I have been working on behind the scenes. The 𝗕𝗨𝗜𝗄𝗘𝗢 website is officially live. You can grab merch, check out past builds, and even reach out about custom commissions, all in one place. Everything's packed and shipped straight from the shed. No drop shipping, no middlemen, just proper gear made and designed by me. If you like what I do and want to support the work behind it, head to 𝗕𝗨𝗜𝗄𝗘𝗢.com and have a look around. That's it, back to the build, guys. Now, because I get so many comments about these clamps, I want to take a second to talk about why I like to use them. The reason is they not only squeeze the panel in, but they squeeze the panel flat. They apply pressure from 4 sides, top, bottom, and each end. Now, these are a cheaper alternative to things like the rocker clamps that are like insanely expensive. I think you can pick these up for around 50 bucks a set. They come in a kit and you just make them out of offcuts that you've got. I'm in Australia, so I picked mine up from Timbicon. If you're not in Australia, you can find sets that are equally as good on places like Amazon or other sites. And a few extra clamps doesn't hurt either. And once I had all my panels glued up and everything was dry, it was over to the table saw to rip that strip off and rectify my disaster. And sometimes disasters turn into be happy accidents, because I decided to rip off about 25mm off the end of the panels and offset the pattern towards the back of the cabinet, and it actually turned out to be a really cool design choice. And after getting everything down to the right size and would actually fit through my thicknesser, I give everything a couple of passes to bring it all down to the same plane. Now, I had a little disaster here, but I actually didn't have the camera on. The dang power shut off on the last panel. It had like 2 inches to go, and the planer shut off with the panel still in there and destroyed the end of it. So I had to cut it off, and now the cabinet's a little bit smaller. And after some sanding, it was time to mark everything out and cut everything to size. Now, the side panels are easy, they're just rectangles. However, the top and the bottom panels are going to be trapezoid shaped. And that way, I'll have a little shelf or cubby hole to store a display bottle on the outside of the cabinet. And then it was time to start gluing everything together. Now, initially, I'm just going to go ahead and just do butt joints with glue. I know this is not structural, but I am going to go back through later on and do through dowels on all the joints. This will serve two purposes. One, it'll add the structure that the cabinet needs for it to be strong. Number two, it'll also be a nice little design feature on the top, because you'll see the beautiful little Grundis dowels. And sometimes I surprise even myself, because I cannot believe how well I got these layered strips to line up. They are literally a millimeter perfect. So pat on the back, Dino, good job. And before we go ahead and stick the top on, I wanted to create a little feature panel to sit in each one of these wings. All I'm going to do is mark out the size of the panel, cut it to size, being sure to match the angle of that trapezoid shape, put some Forstner holes in it for some details, and glue it in place. And to mount the top, I'm just going to follow the same process as I used for mounting the sides. I'm just going to put some glue and some clamps to lock it into place, and then I'll go back through and add the dowels. Now, when it comes to marking out the locations for the dowels, it was really simple. All I did was find the center of those uprights, those side panels, transferred that to the top of the panel, drew a line across it, and then marked out some spacings that I was happy with, and just drilled straight through the top into that side panel, put a little bit of glue in there, and I put some eucalyptus Grundis dowels in there, and they look amazing. And I did my best to film this process, but you wouldn't believe it, the power went out again. Hence why the clip's a little dark. And I went throughout the whole cabinet, and I did this dowel method everywhere I put glue. Everywhere I had two mating surfaces touching, I went through and put dowels on it. Now, I know there's a lot of ways to do joinery like this. You could do rebates or dados, whatever you want to call them, and lock those panels in, and that would probably eliminate the dowels. However, I find the dowels really nice. I think they're a really good aesthetic choice. And for a cabinet of this nature where I'm using multiple species of wood, it's just another way to tie everything together. So I want to make a little panel to go in the back here that's lined in velvet. So every time you open the cabinet, you'll see a nice little velvet backdrop. I'm so conflicted on what color to choose. So I'm going to make the panel removable. And how I'm going to do it is on the table saw, I'm going to take a little square out of these and then stick them in the back, and the panel will drop in from the back. So I've got this like burgundy velvet, or I've got this cream kind of velvet, but I think that's going to get too dirty too quick. And I don't know, no, I don't have enough left over of that one. So they're my choices. And I think I'm going to go with this, but if it's too rich and it's too red once it's oiled, yeah, I can just pop the panel out and just put in a different color. So that is the plan. And after setting up the table saw and almost committing to cutting these, I stood back and I looked at things and I thought, this just seems way too sketchy to do on the table saw. So I went through and set up my router and I decided to do it that way. And once I had all my rebates done, it was just a matter of taking them over to the miter saw and cutting them to size with a 45-degree angle so it makes a little frame. Now, I could have done butt joints on these, whatever, but I decided to go miters because it's going to be visible from the inside of the cabinet, and I thought it was just going to be a much more aesthetic choice. Once I had all my strips glued in and I could get a final measurement, I went over to my plywood cart and selected a piece of ply. Now, if you want to see how I made this plywood cart, I actually have a video on that, so you can check that out after this one. And from there, it's just a matter of transferring my measurements onto the ply, cutting it down to size, and get it ready to cover in velvet. And next up is doors. I was originally going to do velvet lined doors for the outside of this cabinet, but once I made that back panel, I knew it was going to be way too overwhelming, and then I found this piece of wood and I knew this was going to be the feature. The timber I used for these doors is so special. It's got so much curly figuring in it, and it's got a little bit of sapwood and it's got multiple tones, so I think it's going to translate really, really well. So after some milling and making sure I had a really nice clean straight edge on all these joins, I went through and I marked some locations to put some biscuit joins in. Now, glue alone would probably be enough to hold these panels together permanently. However, anytime I get the opportunity to use my biscuit joiner, I always do. I absolutely love this thing, and it's a really good alternative to the more expensive Festool domino jointer. However, I am very curious about a domino jointer, and I am slowly saving my pennies to purchase one just to see what the hype is about. But recently, I've noticed a lot of people using something called a lamello jointer, which is similar to a biscuit jointer, except it uses these little plastic clips that lock in permanently. They have a male and a female that you put in opposing panels and they clip together. So let's see, Festool or lamello? If you've got any opinions or any personal preferences of what you like better, or if you've used a lamello jointer, I'd be really curious to get your feedback, so drop me a comment and let me know what you think. Now that our panel's dry, we can take it over to the table saw and square off one edge so we can take it back to the cabinet, get a nice clean measurement, then back to the table saw, cut it to size and split the panel in half to form the two doors. It's always a good idea to take note of the grain and maybe label left and right or door 1, door 2, just so you can keep a reference of how the grain lines up before you mount your doors. And after a bunch of sanding, we can start thinking about how we're going to mount these doors. Now, for me, I'm just going to use some little brass butt hinges. I'm not going to check them in. I'm just going to screw them flush to the edge of the panel and then flush to the inside of the door. The reason for that is I'm going to put a little featured detail strip that's darker than the doors and darker than the cabinet to offset and create a bit of contrast. For knobs, I just chose some simple little round brass guys. They'll complement the hinges and they'll also tie in with the Forstner holes on those featured wing panels. And now I need to come up with a way to keep these doors closed, and I'm going to keep it super simple. I've got some little 10mm rare earth magnets, so I'm going to take a Forstner bit, drill a little hole and epoxy a magnet in the top and bottom of each door. And magnets only work as magnets if they've got something to magnetize against. So I took a little offcut of metal and I just cut out some little, essentially L-shaped brackets, a bit of paint, screwed them on, and the magnet's got something to hold against. Next, I'm just going to go through and add that little detail strip between the doors and the cabinet body just to close that gap. A handy little tip is if you have a tight area that you can't get a clamp in, masking tape works really well to hold things temporarily while glue's drying. And to finish this cabinet off, all we need to do is make a base. To do that, I'm going to take some of this jarrah and I'm going to mill it into 40mm strips. Now, because this cabinet's got a lot going on detail-wise, and it's going to sit really low to the ground because my chairs sit low to the ground, I didn't want to pack too much detail into this, so I decided to go with a really simple design. All I did was set my miter saw to 18 degrees and made all my cuts at that angle. The reason I chose 18 degrees is because that's the angle of the trapezoid shape. To connect these leg structures together, I'm just going to take some double-sided tape to temporarily hold them in place so I can get them in the clamp. I've marked out some locations for some dowels. I'm going to drill some holes. I'll remove that double-sided tape, replace it with glue, and pop some dowels in. And for the leg stretchers, it's the exact same process as putting the legs together, just positioning them, drill some holes, pop some glue, some dowels, and it's done. And to attach the base to the cabinet, I just decided to go with glue. I decided that there was enough surface area there to create a good bond, and I didn't really need a mechanical connection because the cabinet's for me. Once I put it in place, it might only move once or twice in its entire lifetime. So I decided that glue was enough. And after that, it was time for a good coat of Gilly's orange oil, and this thing completely came to life. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and check out the reveals. Considering this is the first time I've really built a cabinet of this nature, I'm really stoked with how this turned out. I love the little dowel accents right throughout it. Those wings with those Forstner holes in it really add something, and I cannot believe how well I managed to line up this pattern all the way around the perimeter of the cabinet. My mind is blown by that. So get out there and push yourself, guys. Take your time and just have some fun in the workshop. I definitely learned a lot of lessons. For example, write your measurements down and consider how wide your thicknesser is before you glue your panels up. And in the end, I'm really happy with my color choice for the velvet. I think that is definitely going to stay. But if I outgrow it, I could pop the panel out and put a new one in. If you made it this far, thank you so much, and you are an absolute legend. And if you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it, please consider subscribing, hit that notification button, and hold on to your hats. More cool things coming, and I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.